name's Leon from official PlayStationMagazine.co.uk, and I'm here with Ted Price, the President and CEO of Insomniac Games, one of the most recognisable PlayStation developers. We're going to talk about the history of the studio, starting with Disruptor, which was your first game in 1994.
We started in '94 and then we released it in '96. That's right.
So what was the thought process behind that? What were you doing beforehand?
I was working at a medical company, startup medical company. It's my uncle's company, as a med tech after graduating from college, and I was going out on house calls with physicians and taking care of very sick people in their homes.
So that's quite an unusual leap. Where did the idea come from, and the experience then to work on a PlayStation game?
Well, I've always been a gamer all my life, and I, as a kid, programmed games, tried to program games, and continued that love affair with games through into college and beyond. And when I was working at the medical company, I ended up doing a lot of programming databases there, and I ended up deciding that medicine was wasn't going to end up being my life. And I left the company, was doing some consulting, and saved enough money to start a game company. Because, for me, I was missing that creation aspect of my life, that opportunity to build stuff from scratch.
That sounds amazing. You look at how the games industry works now, and the idea you just said you saved enough money. So just working a normal job, you built up enough capital to then release a PlayStation game. Is that including buying the dev kit?
Well, so that allowed me to start the company,
right,
which meant that I could rent an office, buy a 3DO dev kit, a PC, a Mac, and pay for my own rent and food, which as a 23 or 24-year-old, I wasn't spending a whole lot of money outside of just sitting in my little 10x10 office and programming.
So who was there at the time? Who was involved in the company? Who were the people there at the beginning?
Well, at the first it was just me,
yeah, for
a while, and then I got wind of a guy named Al Hastings, who was a friend, a roommate of one of my mom's friend's sons.
Right.
Sorry, complicated. But
yeah.
he was about to graduate from my alma mater. We both went to Princeton back in New Jersey, and I was told that, hey, if you start a game company, you need to call Al Hastings. He's the smartest guy around. And Al was about to graduate with a double major in cognitive science and I think computer science, and it was true. Al is a brilliant guy, and he agreed to come out to California, where I was living, and join me at Insomniac. And together we put together a video of our first demo for Disruptor, and we literally drove up and down the West Coast in my Saturn, knocking on the door of every publisher we could find with our videotape that showed our first quasi-level in Disruptor. And Al had done all the programming. He built this engine from scratch in a month, and I was doing the art and the animation and the sound, and we got shut down everywhere. We basically got rejected by every single publisher, and we came home. We were down to the last few $100 in my bank account, and Al was living on my couch, so I was paying for everything, and it was about to be lights out. But we made one last trip to Universal Interactive Studios in Los Angeles. They just opened up a game division at Universal, and we met a guy named Mark Cerny, and he took a look at what Al had programmed, and he said, wow, you guys have some real technical chops. And it was really Al who had the technical chops. I was the random art dude.
Yeah.
And so he said, let's work together. And I remember coming home from that trip and having a message on my phone from Mark saying, we want to do a 3-game deal. That was incredible for a couple guys who were just doing garage development.
Yeah.
To get an offer for a 3-game deal was amazing.
Did you at that point think, oh crap, what are we going to do for 2 and 3? Or
No.
We'll take it.
Wasn't thinking about anything other than the fact that we were about to miss rent. So that was huge for me and huge for Al. And the first thing we did was we called Al's brother, Brian Hastings. Brian is another brilliant programmer and a brilliant creative guy. And Brian agreed to join us. He was working at Siemens, which is a pacemaker company. And again, coming from no game background, and he came and joined us, and the three of us began work on Disruptor. We'd already had the basic idea, but we continued to work on what was to become our first playable for the game.
You shipped Disruptor. Was that 3-man sort of team?
No, we grew.
Yeah.
So we added folks. We probably were at a maximum of 12 people, when at the height of our production, and then we shrunk back down to 5 after the game was done. And that was a difficult production because we were learning how to make games while we were making our first game.
So you shipped Disruptor. What was the sort of the first thing that happened after that? Were you then set up? Were you now think you thought we're a company now, or were you still having to chase the next thing? Were you still?
Well, we were actually on the lot at Universal, so we'd been through at least 6 office moves during Disruptor, because we started growing and we had to move out of our small San Diego office to a bigger one, and then we ended up moving up to Los Angeles. And the place we moved was the Universal lot, because we were doing a deal with Universal and they gave us free office space, which is fantastic. But we were shuffled around because of we were pretty low on the pecking order in terms of groups that needed space.
Yeah.
The really cool aspect of being up there was we worked next door to Naughty Dog, who had just signed a deal with Universal as well. And we got to know Jason and Andy from Naughty Dog really well, and we ended up finally settling on a place in one of the buildings where we both shared a testing area, and we would have Quake matches almost every night between the two companies. It was a lot of fun.
And that's obviously a relationship that's persisted, because you and Naughty Dog and Sucker Punch have quite sort of close-knit sort of community in development terms, and friends, I guess.
Yeah, we are all friends.
Yeah.
And I think in general the development community, especially for console developers who have come out of that era, is a close-knit community. And what's really cool, and just in general, is that developers of all types, whatever type of game you're making, are usually very willing to help each other and offer advice, and because we're all in this together. We really are all motivated by the same thing, which is creating.
Okay, so next up comes Spyro, which is, from Disruptor, was quite a sort of a hardcore sort of shooter, matching sort of with Doom and those sort of games, and then suddenly Big Purple Dragon.
Yes.
Why was there such a sort of a change in tone, I guess?
Part of it was that we've been working on a very dark game. Disruptor was intended to be a dark game, even though the cinematics were pretty cheesy and comical. But after going through that experience, we needed a breath of fresh air, something different. And Mark Cerny, again, our producer at the time at Universal, brought up the fact that during that time in the PlayStation's life cycle, Nintendo owned the family market. There was nothing on PlayStation that was really making any inroads into that particular audience. So he said, here's an opportunity, guys. Do you think you could do something that's family oriented? Because if you can, there's a big audience that's waiting on PlayStation for it. So we brainstormed, and Craig Stitt, the name of one of our artists at the time, said, I have always wanted to do a game featuring dragons. And when he said that, we all said, oh, totally, that makes sense. We all love dragons. Everybody loves dragons. And interestingly, Al Hastings had been working on a new engine, one that would afford much broader views on the PlayStation than were available in any other engine. And it was really cool. It really jived well with this idea that we could build a character who could glide through these pastoral, very open environments. So the two sort of disparate elements meshed really well, and we started prototyping what became Spyro.
Okay, and so what was the design document, if you like? What was the thing when you sat down and go, these are our core elements that we want to get, as well as the landscape stuff? What do you want to achieve?
I can't remember a specific design document, but what I do remember is prototyping Spyro. And I remember Brian Hastings in particular, he's now our Chief Creative Officer, focusing on the camera and controls for Spyro. And his goal was to make it as fun to just run Spyro around in circles as it was to play Mario 64. And I remember looking at Mario 64 with Brian. He pointed out that, hey, just running around in a circle with Mario is fun. Just climbing up those first few trees and doing flips off the tree is awesome. That is fun factor. That's toy factor. He called it toy factor.
Yeah.
And when he was working on Spyro, his goal was to achieve the same thing without any enemies on screen, and he did it. And when he got that down, when it was fun just to run Spyro around and hop, we knew that we had something special.
What are your sort of overriding memories then of Spyro? I guess you moved from Disruptor to suddenly making a big sort of family game. Is there like a technical thing, or just a long day in the office, or one thing you always remember when you think of Spyro?
Well, there are a lot of moments in Spyro, I think, for all of us who were there at the time. I remember one in particular was our arguments over the character itself. We began working with a character artist named Charles Zimbalist, who made the first few sketches of Spyro, and Spyro evolved a lot in the very beginning. He started out as a more mature dragon because that was our original intent. And then we realized if we want to make a family-friendly game, he can't be this gruff, older-looking dragon. He should probably be cute. But he ended up being smaller and angry. and eventually, through lots of back and forth with Charles, we ended up with a cute dragon. But that back and forth, that was stressful. That was my first real, I think, creative challenge in terms of working with others to achieve consensus on a specific direction where everybody could own it. And that was a good lesson in terms of how to work with others who have similar creative bent.